It is Father's Day, so I want to welcome you here. You know, some of us had good examples as fathers, some of us didn't, but we all have a great, great father in God. I think of, my own dad. I reflect on that. He's been gone many years now, but I think of some of the good example he set. He was very invested in the life of the church. He was a lay leader of the church, which meant he was, carried a heavy burden. He did a lot of the work, was at all the meetings, and I got to see him do that. Also, another thing that just stood out to me as I was reflecting this morning was he did daily, like a devotions for a ministry that they ran where people would come and receive food. And he would just get up and read a devotion with these people that were struggling financially. And I know later in life he would take the grandkids to go be a part of that. And that just stood out to me, just, some of these things that he did really just to keep the church moving forward. And our relationship wasn't always great. We definitely had some contentious seasons in life, and maybe you've had some of those as well. I also think of just raising some kids, right? So we sent a couple out into the stratosphere now. So, I know a little bit, I still have a lot to learn, but I think of, what things worked for us as a family. I always try to pass those down. We did morning devotions every morning, and we still do that every morning. And I know that is hard. When you're getting ready for school, time is so precious and it's hard. But believe me, if you stay disciplined, you can squeeze 2 or 3 minutes out, and you can work that in there as a family. Also, just reading the Bible together, that was something that, my dad did with me, and I think it was because he just didn't know what else to do. So he thought, I'll just at least read the Bible, So we took that on as a family, and we just started doing that every night as a family, and we still continue that every night. And the neat thing about it was that oftentimes in that time before we would do the reading was we'd have some amazing conversations as a family. It'd be the one time when we'd really, sit down and gather. We try to pray at every meal. That was something we just sat down, kind of, wanted to discipline ourselves on. And then there were also things that didn't work. I'll tell you what didn't work in ministry was giving the church your best and then coming home and giving your family your worst, those sort of things. And the great thing about discipleship and continuing to learn is that you've had examples, you've had good examples, you've had bad examples, and guess what? You get to be the one that forms the mold on how you disciple others around you, your family, right? And you've also seen this at work in the church as well. Like, what kind of spiritual mentors have stood out for you? I'm sure you've seen good examples and bad examples too, right? Like, it took a village to disciple me, I can tell you that. I can think of many people along the way. I think of a guy like a Stuart Hazel who had a basketball ministry. Like, I needed that guy in my life because he was like a coach mentality, right? It was just, we played basketball and then he squeezed a devotional in there. And it changed our lives, as a bunch of kids playing church basketball. And I think of bad examples as well, and you've had those in your life as well. So it's up to us as a church to, break the mold of the bad examples and take what we've learned in those good molds and move those forward so that we can help be that village that disciples the next generation as well. And so we're going to look at some scripture here today that's going to kind of encompass all of this. We're going to be getting into, we're reading late in the book of Acts, and it's really where the church is growing. We're kind of in this season as a church, this post-Pentecost season, so the church is moving out now, and it's breaking into Europe, and so we're kind of getting into that season now. I just want to take a little section out of Acts chapter 16 here and kind of talk about this whole idea of raising disciples. All right, chapter 16. Paul came to Derbe and then to Lystra, where a disciple named Timothy lived, whose mother was Jewish and a believer, but whose father was a Greek. The believers of Lystra and Iconium spoke well of him, and Paul wanted to take him along on the journey. So he circumcised him because of the Jews who lived in that area, for they all knew that his father was a Greek. As they traveled from town to town, they delivered the decisions reached by the apostles and the elders in Jerusalem for the people to obey. So the churches were strengthened in the faith and grew daily in numbers. So we just kind of get a snapshot of what was going on here with Paul and Timothy. And of course, a large part of the New Testament is attributed to Paul, and we get to see the impact that he had here as a disciple maker, and then also the impact that Timothy would have down the road. And just to kind of set the scene a little bit here in Lystra, this is a place where there had been real healings, right? So Paul had healed a man who had been crippled from life. He had gotten up and walked, and so you can think of this is like the height of ministry, right? To get to witness something like that and to get to see that. And then also in Lystra, there had been the low point of ministry. Paul and Barnabas were there. Paul had been beaten, stoned, dragged out of the city, and left to die. And so he experienced both the highs and the lows of ministry within this area. And it's kind of hard to believe that there's even a church there, right? I mean, you take the leader out, beat him, and leave him to die. Who wants to be a part of that, right? But interestingly enough, it's these experiences that allow the church to grow. And I just want to encourage you, when we look across history, you just can't keep the church down. Every time people try to step on the church, try to persecute it, try to push it down, whatever they try to do, the church rises up. And growth is usually happening around these areas of persecution. And maybe you've experienced this in your own life as well. Maybe you've experienced those hard moments, those hard things that you've been through, whatever it is, that you've been persecuted by others, or you've had to go through a major life change, or you've lost something along the way. Oftentimes, these hardest points in life are where we also have the most growth. So just realize that. And I don't know that anybody really wants to pray for persecution in their life. But when it comes, we shouldn't be afraid, because we know from the gospel that on the other side of that is growth. All right? So we also have a mention of Timothy here, right? And so this whole idea of raising disciples. You can see how it takes a village to raise a disciple. So you get first a mention of Timothy, his mother and his grandmother. And if we go back to a letter that Paul later writes to Timothy, 2 Timothy, I think we got it here. Pull that up. I am reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded now lives in you. Right? These are real people. This is a real recollection of his mother and his grandmother, to see the influence that they had in his life. And I've seen this in many of you. I want to encourage you. This entire message today is just an encouragement in the work that you're already doing. I see some of you doing this work, right? Wonderful mothers and fathers in the faith, wonderful grandmas and grandpas in the faith, nurturing the ones that you love. And I want to encourage you to keep that up, to realize how important it is. Timothy wouldn't have been where he was without the encouragement of his mother and grandmother, right? And we've got even their names, which is awesome, amazing. So then we also get this line, which we got twice in our scriptures here. But his father was a Greek. So his father would have believed in that whole pantheistic view of all the Greek gods and goddesses, and that whole world vision, which was the predominant world vision there at that time, especially in that area. And so Timothy needed a male mentor in his life, right? He needed someone to come along in the Christian faith to help him continue to grow. And maybe you've had that experience in your life. Maybe someone came alongside you that was able to help mentor you, someone within the church. Maybe you've got to play the role of being a mentor. I mean, what a blessing, I've been able to do that a few times, and I always think I got more out of it than the person I was able to help mentor. And God just uses us in those relationships and those experiences. And so Timothy needed that mentor in his life. So it says that the believers spoke well of him. So remember, Paul and Barnabas were there 2-3 years back, right? And so they had planted that original church, and so there were those believers there, believe it or not. Even though they had seen the leaders take a beating, they still continued to believe. And they thought well of Timothy. So, there's the onus on us as the mentors. There's the onus on us as parents and grandparents. And there's also onus on the one that's being discipled, right? There's a certain responsibility we have as well to desire to learn, to want to learn, to want to give our best, right? And sometimes it takes a while to learn those things. But Timothy had earned the respect of the people there as someone who they saw something in him, right? That he had some gifts that could be of good use for the future of the church. And so, a believer at that time in Judaism it wasn't like we would think of so much today when we think of someone maybe doing converting to Christianity from whatever other faith they were in. If Paul's father would have converted from the Greek religion into Christian, that would have been a conversion. But for Judaism at that time, it was really just a smooth slide. It was Jesus was seen as the Messiah. So for those early Christians that they just thought, they were Jewish themselves, they just saw this as a continual slide of Judaism at that time, right? Jesus is the Messiah. This is the one that we've been waiting for. So it wasn't like a conversion to slide into Christianity for them. So they speak well of Timothy in this, and Paul, recognizes this as well. So remember, Timothy comes from this mixed religious background, and some of us come from those, right? Some of us have a mother or a father who was a strong believer, and the other parent wasn't, right? And maybe one of them was our connection to the church, or the other one, or maybe it was through a grandparent, but he was in this mixed relationship here, which also lets us know that at this time, outside of Jerusalem, the Jewish faith was kind of in a different state, right? So you had these intermarriages going on, and so life was different for people living in these intermarriages. So we read that Paul had Timothy circumcised, and I'm sure Timothy had say in this as well. And we read, because of the Jews. Now, I have just heard this glossed over most of my life, and I always wondered, why? And I'm one of those people, I want to teach people the why behind it, right? So why did he feel like he had to do this? So if you don't understand circumcision in the Jewish faith, you go all the way back to Abraham. And so you got to understand what a covenant is first, right? Some of you have heard me talk about this before. So a covenant was a language that they could grab a hold of in ancient days, right? A covenant was an agreement between two people, usually a Caesarean and a vassal, one greater than the other, the Caesarean greater than the vassal, and it was an agreement. It wasn't a promise. You could have promises within a covenant, but a covenant was an agreement that these two parties were going to withhold their end of the agreement up. And if you were going to come to have a covenant, the language was, we are going to cut a covenant. And maybe you've heard that before. That's still stuck with that idea of covenant. So often what happened was they would cut an animal in half, cut a covenant. You would spread that animal in half, and then the lesser party would usually walk through the middle of that animal, as to say, I am passing through the cut of the covenant, right? So this is my agreement as I'm entering into this covenant. And it's also saying, if I don't uphold my end of the deal, may what happened to this animal happen to me. It's kind of the lesser one saying, I'm giving my life to this. And really, it's an agreement that these two parties are going to do life together. And oftentimes it was the greater party would offer protection, right? So we're not going to let anybody else harm you. And then the other party might pay tribute or pledge allegiance or something of that nature. So in Abraham's time, when he enters into a covenant with God, and the covenant is marked by the cut of circumcision. And he's like, that's weird. Why? How does that make any sense? We got to understand the history, right? So the cut allowed, and also their mindset of how they see childbirth, that the seed of the child began in the male, and the seed would pass through in order to get to the female. Now, this is thousands of years ago, so give them some credit for having, some understanding of what was going on. So as the seed would pass through the cut of the covenant, the child was now born into the covenant. So you had already passed through the covenant, right? And so this just was to be handed down generation to generation to each male. And you can see, like, when they, in Moses' time, when they get lost in the desert, they break away from this. So for the Jews at this time, when they're trying to minister to this area, if you wouldn't have been a part of the covenant, if you wouldn't have had the cut of the covenant, so to speak, the Jewish people are not going to respect you as a leader in the church. So Timothy and Paul come to the conclusion that in order for Timothy to be a leader in the Jewish church, he's going to have the sign of the cut of the covenant. So I'm sure it wasn't a pleasurable venture, but it was a decision that they made. And it's not necessary, right? We're going to find other places within the scriptures where Paul says, you don't have to do this to be a Christian, right? So he argues several times against that. But in this particular situation, they decide to take this risk in order to reach a certain people group. All right? That's a lot, I know. So how do we do this today? Like, I was thinking just this week, all right? Very similar type situation, although quite different, right? God's put a young man in my life. I feel like there's been a relationship that we've built, a chance for me to disciple him a little bit, and I realize he talks about this one particular sport all the time. It's not a sport I'm interested in. I would never been interested in it, but he talks about it all the time. So finally, I'm like, you know what? I got to engage in this a little bit so I can speak his language. So I checked about a little bit out on YouTube, and all right, I learned enough to continue to have the conversation with him. And I realized in what I was watching that one of the athletes took a Bible verse, quoted it, but took it completely out of context. So it allowed me to now enter back into conversation with him and say, oh yeah, we talked about the sport, had a good conversation, and then I said, and I saw something in there. And now we're able to bridge the gap from sport to the gospel, and we have a whole different conversation. But I'm able to speak his language in order to get to that point of the conversation. I thought about mission work, and we have people that have been full-time missionaries in our congregation, so they can probably speak to this way more than I ever could. But when I think about crossing some cultural lines in places I've been around the world, food is certainly one of them, right? Sometimes you eat some stuff that you don't want to, just so you can culturally cross lines, like, chicken foot soup. Oh, I did not want to eat chicken foot soup. I'm talking real chicken's feet, right? But you do stuff like that in order you kind of create a connection with people so that they'll allow you into their world. And there's different views. People have different stances on, how much we need to cross cultural lines in order to have those engagements. But that's what's going on here as they're ministering to this group of people. So 2 times Luke mentions this idea that Timothy's father was a Greek. So it's important that he's mentioning that here to us. And remember, this sort of idea of crossing cultural lines, Paul is of all people, he's willing to do this more than anybody, right? There's scripture, we've got it up here for you. You'll remember he says this, though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone, to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like a Jew, to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became weak, to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessing. All right? So whether you're learning to play a video game with your kid so you can cross some cultural lines and have some further conversations, or whether you go golfing with somebody even though you shoot 100 on 9 holes, right? You cross the line in order to be able to have that conversation, right? Sometimes we cross these cultural lines, we become things that we're not in order to have the conversations that matter. Okay? So Paul and Timothy are all about this. And as we can see from Paul there, they travel from town to town, right? This is the strategy. This is the strategy that Jesus passed down. We're not supposed to do this alone, right? He would send them out 2 by 2, right? Paul learned this from Jesus. So Timothy and Paul get a chance to go out, and we read that they're delivering decisions reached by the apostles and elders in Jesus for the people to obey. They're just doing the work of the church, right? They're doing the work of the church. And it takes a lot of people doing the work of the church for the church to survive and continue. And I am always amazed that the local church, a church our size, a couple hundred people, manages to survive. Because it takes a lot of people doing a lot of stuff to keep things moving forward, right? And this is kind of when I have a moment and I reflect upon my dad. And even though we had differences, and maybe you know someone in your life, whether it was a parent or a grandparent, or maybe somebody you just met in church, and you say, wow, they really set an example of putting the time in, right? Of making sure that there is a church to hand down to the next generation. And what was the last line we read? So the churches were strengthened in the faith and grew daily in their numbers. Right? That was the result of discipleship. And that is always the result of discipleship. That we as people grow and that the church grows, right? And I'm talking the Big C church, right? And that can look, it can look a million different ways. It can be a house church of 10 people, and it can be a huge church of thousands of people. But it's people growing in their relationship with Christ, and that always happens through other people. It always happens through relationships. Jesus comes to you through someone else in relationship so that you can learn. And as you become a part of what God is doing in God's church, you then become the instrument through which Jesus works. Right? You become the vessel that the Holy Spirit uses to pour discipleship out to another human being. Each and every one of us is called to that work. We have the vision around here. It's come, grow, and serve, right? That just sums it up. This whole idea of discipleship. That's how we impact the world. We hand down the Christian faith to another person. And at this time, as Paul and Timothy are moving throughout Europe, we see Hellenism starts to decline, Christianity is on the rise, and you just can't beat the formula. Time times trust equals impact. Time times trust equals impact. I want you to think about the people in your life, because this is what they offered you. They offered you their time. They built trust with you because of the integrity that they had, and they had an impact in your life because of that. And the same is true for us as a church. This is how we have impact in others' lives, and this is how we have impact in the community and in the world. Time times trust equals impact. So what are your stories? Who are you thinking about? And what are our stories as a church? What stories can we tell? And I have to, share an honest confession. sometimes I really love funerals. The funerals of the saints are some of the most wonderful celebrations I've ever been a part of in my life. And you've heard me say it before, like I feel like we ought to have just as good attendance, if not better, on a funeral, no matter what day it is, than we do on a Sunday morning, because this is the place we get to tell the stories. This is the place we get to hear the stories. Right? You get to tell the story of a police officer who left his job and became a pastor in the church. I love that service. Tell the story of a woman who decided somewhere there in the back row that she was going to start a clothes ministry here in Frankenmuth. Who would ever think that would be a good idea? And now here, $1 million later, and a few years later, quite a few ministries across the county have been impacted by that. Man, what a wonderful funeral that was. And even just recently, right? Got to tell the story of a woman who goes to Mexico and does mission trips, and also has the idea to start a sewing ministry. Man, those are great stories. The impact that people have because they believe in this whole idea of raising disciples. And church, everything we do leads back to that. All this stuff we do is a mechanism that we use in order to raise disciples. So I just want to encourage you. Really, that's the whole gist of this message today. Encouragement. Whoever's life you're involved in, keep it up. If you haven't been involved in someone's life, start praying. God, would you send the person that I'm going to disciple? If you've had a bad person, figure, relationship that hasn't been a good reflection in your life when it comes to this, you be the one that changes it for the next generation. You have that opportunity, and there's never an age limit on this either. You can start discipling someone when you are knee-high to a grasshopper. Little brother, little sister, somebody at school, and you never age out of this either. I have seen people on their deathbed still discipling. I want to encourage you, wherever you're at, whatever you do, everything, every breath, nothing more important in this life than is the work you have of raising disciples. Let's pray.